God.
Corey, did you see this Data and Society heat map of the Alternative Influence Network on YouTube?
Do you have it up?
Yeah, we'll put it up here.
I did. I haven't had the chance to dig into it. A number of people sent it to me saying, "Look, it's everything you've said," which is nice to see, but it also doesn't put it at the top of my reading pile because it's like, well, I already know it. But what did you learn from it?
Well, to be honest, I'm only looking at it. It's funny to see how big of a hub Sargon of Akkad is.
He really has some staying power.
But also,
although I think it's because he's getting connected with UKIP. He's actually like becoming a UKIP figure in the UK.
There's some names I haven't heard of. Like, I don't know who Andy Worski is.
I don't know who that
I've never heard that name before. But Stefan Molyneux is also the other one. So,
right.
I mean, what I find most interesting, cut away for a little bit, Jamie. I got another thing to put up there. Is that Ben Shapiro, Rubin, and Crowder have been freaking out because they're on it, listed very closely to people like Stefan Molyneux. So Ben Shapiro writes, "So now we've got a voxing of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon study that connects me with Richard Spencer. Well done, as always. Well done, as always.
Well done, as always. Yes. Doesn't this also... Well, I mean, actually, Corey, tee off on that first, and there's something else I want to
There's one more here.
Okay,
we got Dave Rubin. They all got mad because Ezra Klein tweeted it out. It's funny how Ezra
Dave Rubin's still doing this?
Yeah, do you want to read that one?
Hey Dave, hi at Ezra Klein. Want to explain to me how a gay, married, pro-choice, pro-pot, against death penalty for reforming prison/drug sentencing is part of the reactionary right? You know what's so funny about this trope now is I actually think not that any of these fascists would go to the mat for these issues, but actually what's very funny to me is there are in today's political environment there's probably any number of highly reactionary, anything to overt white supremacist people who actually probably come down on the so-called left side of all of these issues, right? Like drugs should be legalized. People are over incarcerated.
Some of these are so easy just to say, right? Like I'm against the death penalty.
Yeah, I mean also like
prisons.
Marriage equality and anti-death penalty and pro-pot are basically like, and I would say even pro-choice amongst a certain subset. Like those are not the new dividing line with sort of like the right and left, I think, for like under 40 or under 35 or whatever is not like it's I mean there's obviously still religious right-wingers, but it's more like, well, yeah, I mean I support gay marriage, but I think we should have a white ethno-state, which is not included in this dumb Dave Rubin tweet.
None of those are terribly redistributionary either.
Of course.
He's ditched the healthcare stuff.
Right. This is just I mean, that's the other way. It's just libertarian, whatever. And this is also another reason why it's very, very tricky to get into alliances with those people. But Corey, you were going to say in terms of this stat and how it's validated.
Oh yeah, well I finally am looking at this heat map, and I don't recognize who some of these as well, like Kraut NT and Bunty King.
Yeah, I don't know most of these
computing
folks.
I mean, I don't want to advertise stuff that's probably just funneling people into some hellish sort of Nazi spiral, but many of these I do, and they're It's good to see people do this work, but it's sort of also like stuff that you can figure out just by watching these folks.
It's like following your own algorithms. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the way that the other shows that they recommend, I mean, it just sort of it's confirmation of stuff that not just myself, but people, many guests on your show. The whole crew have been saying for, a couple of years, and hopefully what this does, this kind of research, is convince the sort of mainstream press, and by that I mean, the press that feels it has to be neutral regarding the alt-right still, because they're still out there. That the people who are presenting themselves as classical liberals or just simply liberals and yet echoing alt-right arguments shouldn't be taken at face value.
Right.
That's been my main message to friends in the media who are working at those kind of outfits, because it can be hard. I mean, to tie it back to what we were talking about before, not everyone is fortunate enough, and I've made quite a bit of sport about Ezra Klein over the years, but not everybody is fortunate enough, like your buddy from Vox, to work for someone who will receive a legal threat like that and respond appropriately, by which I mean laugh it off and go back to doing your work. A lot of times, those kind of threats do have chilling effects on speech.
Right.
And, the people that need to be convinced that there are bad faith actors associated with the alt-right, or with overlaps in terms of audience with the alt-right, who present themselves as something other than what they are. And I hope these kind of investigations and sort of the quantified approach, where you actually get a nice, easily referenced infographic at the end, convinces people who don't yet get it. Although I think most of your listeners do.
Yeah, I think so. I also, go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. Nazis historically have used liberal values that they do not believe in a bad faith way to advance themselves within a liberal society. So maybe I struggle with this myself, but maybe there is a case for deplatforming the farthest of the far right, like actual neo-Nazis. Like our friend Brandon Jordan made a good documentary about the anti-fascist movement, kind of connecting it up through history. And like, when Hitler was rising to power, like, Nazis had their rallies out in the open and drew tons of people and bolstered their cause that way. So the question then becomes, obviously the people we're dealing with now in America are a bunch of, LARPing edgelords. But at what point is it a good idea to intervene with them having a platform?
That's the question. I think there have been some misfires, but for the most part, the Antifa deplatforming strategy seems to have worked. I mean, remember a couple of months ago when Richard Spencer was like, can't raise money anymore. And you've had Milo out there whining about how, woe is Milo.
Yeah, if nothing else, it costs them tons and tons of
money.
That's
the part that I support. Yeah,
plus,
that's why
a lot of these rallies where they say, oh, our free speech is being suppressed, they're not just there to talk. They're there to beat up liberals and people of color and anti-fascist activists.
Well, that's the point I try to stress whenever I'm on a sort of mainstream show and they ask about these subjects, because it's what I've seen repeatedly, that, these aren't free speech rallies. They're rallies designed to provoke or incite violence. And, just because you call it a free speech rally and wave an American flag and co-opt all this symbolism and language and essentially appropriate the cultural context of American patriotism for fascistic ends, it does seem to fool a number of people. So you do have to address them on the terms that they present, unfortunately, even if it's easier for some of us to see through than others.